All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Welcome to this conversation on college admissions. I forgot the headline. It was something somewhat clickbaity.
Thoughtful approach.
A thoughtful approach. Oh, yeah, we got rid of the really clickbaity headline. A thoughtful approach on college admissions. I'm Sal Khan. A lot of y'all might know based on my association with Khan Academy, but also I'm the founder of Khan Lab School and Khan Lab High School. And I'm really honored to have three folks who really know what they're talking about when it comes to college admissions. First, we have Rick here, who's the Director of Admissions at Georgia Tech.
Right.
Welcome, Rick. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to it. Thank you all for coming.
Yeah. We have Brennan, who's the Director of College Counseling at Khan Lab High School. And we have Eva, who is the Vice President of Admissions here at Santa Clara University. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, thanks for having me, and welcome everyone to Santa Clara University.
Yes. And I also want to give a special thanks to Eva and the entire Santa Clara University community for hosting us here. For those folks, I am informed that we will be also streaming and it'll be on the internet. So we're at Santa Clara University out here in Northern California as we host this. I don't know where the cameras are. Anyway, I'll talk to the audience. Well, let me start with a big question. And I'll start with you, Rick, and we'll just go down and then we'll start to mix it up a little bit. But what do you think are the biggest misconceptions that folks have about college admissions?
All right, that's a good question. I think, it's hard to say on a misconception or maybe just a limited perspective. I think that's sometimes the big thing that comes immediately to my mind is that, one of the beauties of America and American higher education is the breadth of options. And I have the opportunity to travel to embassies and State Departments for the State Department to consulates and things like this. And, American higher ed is just so different than college and higher education around the world. And there are lots of choices and lots of options. I think that one of the pitfalls / misconceptions is there's only like 100 schools in the country. And that we get really myopic thinking about those specific places. And that's what journalists write about, and that's what makes, rankings, and people just lose perspective on the fact that, based on who a student is, what they're interested in, the way they learn, there's actually lots of different good choices and options, and that's hopefully something we can talk about today.
Actually, I'll ask a follow-up question on that, because as you mentioned, there's far more than 100 universities in the United States. I think it's something like 3,000. But do you think there's something to that when parents and families index on those 100 or 200 universities? Or maybe there is, or maybe but they over-index? How do you think about it? As representing, y'all are all representing one of those 100 universities.
Right.
I would guess you want people to pay attention to some degree to them.
Yeah, I mean, certainly Georgia Tech is one of those places that benefits from, being a well-known place. Mm-hmm. At the same time, I've sort of lived what debunks the way people often think. I came to Georgia Tech in 2003, and at the time, we were, and maybe this speaks to a misconception, and the misconception would be that there's a correlation between your admit rate and the quality of the institution. So for instance, at that time, Georgia Tech was admitting 63% of students who applied. And over the course of time, we're now at 18%. I would really argue, though, that we're not that different of a place. Yes, we're doing some interesting stuff. Yes, we've continued to invest in faculty and resources and all of this. But if you look back at the students who graduated around the time when it wasn't that hard to get in, these are people that are doing amazing things now in their communities. They're successful by all definitions. And so I do think a misconception is the harder it is to get in, the, quote, better the place, and that there is like a direct correlation between those two. I think I've kind of seen how that's really misleading, and people over-index on that.
Yeah, I love that. And one could even make the opposite argument that the Georgia Tech of 20 or 30 years ago, if the students are getting similar outcomes,
right,
it's telling you more about the education that's actually happening there than
Absolutely.
Let's just try to find the cream of the cream type of
Agreed.
thing. No, I love that one. Brennan, major misconceptions, or a few of them.
Yeah, there's lots of them. I think I'll build off what Rick said. I think that there's this misconception that it has to be high stakes, right? That it has to be it has to be an overwhelming experience and stressful and anxiety producing, and 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 we talk a lot about this in the book. Like you can go into the college admission experience in a really intentional way, and not have it be something that you have to get through, right? Not something you have to endure. It should be this idea of, oh, look at all these opportunities, and how do these opportunities match what I want for my future, right? Not like, how am I going to get into this place, and how am I going to position myself and kind of put this portfolio together that's perfect to get into this school. It's not this. It's not a zero-sum game, right? It's not. I think one of the other. This kind of plays into that. Is one of the other misconceptions is that there's a certain amount of spots, and if somebody gets in, they've kind of taken your place, or you've taken their place, and it's not fair, right? Like, college admission is not fair, and it wasn't really designed to be fair. It could be a lot more just, and it could be a lot more equitable, but it shouldn't be looked at as something that is kind of a game or a prize to be won. It should be something that is about looking at yourself, looking at what your hopes are for the future, what your goals are, and then finding schools that match that possibility, that will help you get there. And so it should be less about kind of where you go and more about who you are and what you want.
Yeah, no, find that interesting. And I'll double down on that. I'll double click on that a little bit, because I think it is a tension that everyone who's thinking about college admissions is dealing with. What about you, Eva? What is the biggest misconception, or a few misconceptions you've seen?
I agree. That's a big one. I think that very often students think that it's the institution that's going to make them, right? Mm-hmm. And by evidence, I went to one of those big institutions. Mm-hmm. I went to Yale. Mm-hmm. I'm here working for Santa Clara University, which I believe is such a great institution for many students. Mm-hmm. But that's the beauty about higher ed in the United States, right, is that there's just so much variation. Now, and we just look around. We look at our parents, at our friends, at our teachers, at our, coworkers, and they all went to a variety of just great, wonderful schools. And when you ask them what it was like, I think they start telling you how distinctive their journeys were. And so it really is about, I think, the student finding that connection to the kind of place that's going to enliven their energy, their intellect, their curiosity. And that's not the same place for all people. And the big names don't necessarily guarantee that. So I do think that there's so many wonderful institutions that we just need to spend some time getting to know, but equally getting to know ourselves as individuals, as students, so that as we ask the questions, we're making those identifying, the attributes that are really going to make, that are going to be attractive. And I assure you that you'll find more than one school or more than 10 schools that will fulfill that. I think the other thing, misconception, is that students feel that they need to submit or a perfect application, or that they need to present themselves as perfect, however they define that, whether it be a 4.0, right, or a number of activities or experiences that they deem perfect. And I hear very often the question, well, what do you want to see in my application? And I think what you'll hear from any number of institutions is we want to hear who you are authentically. Right? More than just the what is the why, right? And getting to really know you as an individual. And we don't expect perfection. That's why we want to welcome students, right? Is to be part of that transformative process. So it's okay to present the challenges that folks faced, and that you're still working towards them, if not perfect. So it really is people reviewing applications, right? And we're just as human, and have experienced this process before you. So there's quite a bit of understanding and empathy.
Yeah, I mean, listening to all of y'all, it sounds like the misconceptions or the conceptions fall into one of two categories: how students and families judge the colleges and universities, and the other category is how the colleges and universities judge the students and families. Just to follow on this, and a lot of y'all talked about how the students, actually y'all talked about both, but what people index on, what they might get, quote, attached to, and Buddha tells us, attachment is the cause of all suffering. So we need to remember that, especially in college admissions. But there's a couple of ways to think about it. One is where a lot of people gravitate to, they think of these 100 universities like, oh, if only I had that brand associated with me the rest of my life, life will be easy, which we know it won't be, but or it might not be. There's another where, hey, I need to find the right set of schools, but it's still an important decision because if I find my tribe, my people, I'll thrive. The other is, most of those 3,000 schools are actually quite compelling and have a lot of resources, and it's not about making the right decision, it's about making the decision right. How do y'all think about that? Like, you know, I'm gonna keep pushing y'all because I remember when college admissions has gotten more competitive since all of us applied to college, and I know every family here has this tension between, okay, I know I shouldn't stress out about it, I know it's not just about whatever brand, but at the same time they're like, oh yeah, but I did notice the person who went to so-and-so university, you know, it's maybe helping them a little bit, or their resume gets noticed a little bit more. So I'm kind of asking the same question again, but how would y'all think about this tension that the parents are feeling between these various layers of judging the schools? I'll start with you this time.
Well, you know, I think that parents, I actually would emphasize the students more than the parents to begin with. Because that is, I think, also part of the challenge that students might be facing in this day and age, is that there's quite a bit of pressure already, right, just naturally in this process, and then you add this other layer, and the parents have high expectations perhaps sometimes, but in the end of the day, it really is about the students and where they're going to find a place that's going to, where they're going to thrive. And I would add that, however, it's not just about making them happy, because I will assure you that in my experience, a good experience is one that is challenging, that sometimes is uncomfortable, that sometimes really prompts you to really dig deep. So you're not going to know what that is like until you really start getting to know the institutions a little bit better. And so I think that that's, if anything, my message here is to spend some time doing that. That it's not just, again, the rankings. If you look at the rankings, have a formula. And so they take a look at very specific things that might not be a priority or, you know, have the same level of indexing when you're looking at it from an individual standpoint. So it is, again, sort of taking this process and individualizing it. That doesn't mean that you can't start from a starting point, right? You know, these rankings are so varied. They'll say the top 10, you know, national universities, or the regional universities, or, you know, the best in business, or the best in, so there's so many variations. If that helps you have a starting point, that might be okay. But I would just caution against that being the metric and the end all be all, because it's not. And so I think you got to spend some time with it. But that's both spending time with the institutions on their website, asking questions, getting to know them firsthand from students if you get a chance to visit, alumni. I mean, there's just so many different ways, and certainly the pandemic has introduced a whole number of digital ways to do that as well. So you just got to put a bit of that work into it, but not to necessarily pinpoint, again, what the rankings are going to already tell you, but it's, again, sort of turning it around. And
I love the concept that you introduced, because I don't hear it enough, which is so much of picking a college feels like, you hear it, oh, where can I find more people like myself? Where will the college and the faculty be able to support my interests that I have right now? But to your point, Eva, a lot of that college experience or life experience is about where can the community push you to have experiences that you've never had before, for you to give other people experiences that they've never had before.
That's absolutely right. I think that that's the beauty of college. I mean, when you think about college being also, it's thought of as a social good, right? I think at the same time, you look at any number of mission statements of the universities, and while we all have our variations and its origins, I think you'll find that there's a commonality that we want our alumni to meet the needs of our world, of our society, the challenges, and all that comes from understanding our reality and real issues more than just theoretical or intellectually. We hope that some of that learning comes from experiential learning, whether that's in our surrounding communities. in our very own classrooms in discourse and conversations as with a roommate who might be from another part of the country or from another part of the world, right? This is how we start really humanizing the experience. And I think that that's what's powerful about an education, is because that's where folks really get to learn and connect and create empathy in order to drive you to want to do something with real passion and vigor. So that is why we're not looking for the exact same student. That is why we're looking for varied experiences to really create a dynamic environment on our campuses and that will hopefully challenge students, right? Because it's getting into a debate or a conversation with someone on a different opinion, and that's just based on different perspectives, right?
One thing that you were mentioning, I think, back to this idea of where do people over-index or maybe just start sometimes in the wrong place. It is, and I know in talking to some people on the way in, there were some folks saying that we have freshmen, ninth graders, and in a lot of families, like many represented today, in a lot of communities like many represented today, it is, and in school communities like those are represented today, there's been high value placed on education, and that is a good thing, right? And everybody would say, many of you are here because your parents value education and they want you to have choices and options and see college as that social mobility and networking opportunity, right? However, one thing that I would want to ask everybody to kind of pause on, whether you're a freshman or a junior, I know there's some seniors as well, is you were mentioning mission statements of institutions. And I think too often students quickly go to where they want to go, and the question that they hear from family members and teachers is where. And you kind of have that reiterating where beaten into you. And I think sometimes we have to kind of, walk before we crawl a little bit. And so what I would urge you to do as a student is think a little bit about, when you think about college, asking fundamentally first just this question of, why do I even want to go? Too few students from backgrounds like are represented today ever ask that question. And I think that's a really important one. In fact, that's how we start this whole book out, is asking a question that too few people ask. Why do you want to go? And actually think about writing this out or voice recording it or putting it on your phone or whatever it takes, but coming up with some kind of a mission for why you're going. And this is really going to help you, because I think both Eva and I would confess that we are part of a bigger problem. And that is, we will send all kinds of stuff to students marketing our universities. And I'm sure a lot of you here today can attest to this fact, that in email and in your mailboxes, you're getting a lot of stuff from colleges. So if you remember nothing else from our talk today, one word: recycle. Let's save the world one college brochure.
Y'all are still doing that. I thought that was like late 90s.
In fact,
no.
In fact, I think a lot of people are arguing in post-pandemic world that there's going to be more investment.
Y'all are keeping the post office solvent.
We are.
In the world
we are.
Georgia Tech just published their view book this week, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
It's a physical thing.
Yeah, it is. But as a student, I think it is helpful to do that, because when all this stuff comes in the mail, it will help you for a touchstone to say, all right, they're not all the same. What matches with what I'm interested in? If I have a mission statement written out, if I have a why, then that's going to help you filter out. Because one of your challenges actually is to get rid of some places, right? If you got that many places courting you and that many places telling you about themselves. And then too, when you get in, and this is something people are very concerned about, and then they have a reverse anxiety in like the April month of their senior year when they're into 3 or 4 places. Now they have to choose, and the stress is about picking. And so if you can come back to why, that's really important. And then lastly, I feel like, and I've learned this more in recent years, every freshman, every first-year student on a college campus has at least 1 or 2 sort of dark nights of the soul where they're wondering, did I pick the right place? And they're looking through Instagram, and all their friends are happy and posting their best meals and living their best life. And they're wondering, why am I here? And whether that's Santa Clara or Georgia Tech or any other school, I think everybody has a couple of those days. And if you can come back to why did you choose that place and why are you there, it's going to give a lot of necessary solace. And that is invaluable.
And how do you make the decision right versus the right decision? And I want to follow, y'all wrote a book together, which I should have talked about, but I think this it talks about many things, but tell us about why y'all decided to write this book and what is the core issue. I don't know, Brennan, if you want to.
Yeah, well, I just want to just piggyback on that first, because I think this idea of mission is so important, and it really, this kind of college admission experience is really about, defining your own mission, and then it is incumbent upon you as students and parents and families to then really understand the mission of the school, right? To understand the mission of the colleges and universities that you're researching. And that might look like, getting on and looking at their mission statement, but also really kind of canvassing their college community to understand, to kind of triangulate all the different opinions and views and perspectives on that campus, so you understand their mission in practice, right? And so that you can understand, what is that school community about? Are there people there that are going to push you? Are there the programs there that you're excited about? And then, so how does that mission that you've articulated for yourself, how does that match to the mission of the schools you're looking at? And I think that's crucial. I mean, and in terms of writing the book, I think that's all the things we're talking about here today is why we decided to write the book. I mean, there's a lot of hype and a lot of noise out there about college admission, right? You can read lots of articles about how selective it is, and you can read kind of tell-alls by former admission officers about the secret to getting into this school or that school, or essays that worked, or all these different things. And we kind of wanted to take a step back and say, look, this can be a really fun, meaningful, unifying experience for families. It doesn't have to be one that drives wedges between families and, I wanted to go here and you want me to go here, and these things. It can be this experience that however you define family, that you can go through together and learn about yourselves and each other, and end up in a really great place. And so it's kind of a step-by-step guide to kind of how to do that as a family, and an invitation to do that.
Yeah, it is amazing how much is projected to your earliest point about the certain names. I used to kind of believe that, but over time, observing just a lot of young people and actually not so young people, if you show me a young person who's stepping out of their comfort zone, willing to take on new challenges, has a smile on their face, says hello to people, has hard times, has those dark nights, but perseveres through them, they're going to do fine. Yeah. And then we all know you could pick the top universities in any of these listings, and this is what I actually want to talk about next. The statistics I've seen is about a third of the students are really not in a good place, however you want to define that. And so, some of the trends that at least we see in the headlines over the last 20 or 30 years are admissions rates at the same university might go from the 50s or 60% to the low teens. Okay. At the same time, and I don't know if these are related, but maybe they are, you're hearing about stress and anxiety, both at the high school level and at the college level. Maybe more people are open about it now, maybe it's being documented, or maybe it's real, that there's just more stress and anxiety out in the world, and perhaps they're related. What do you think, any of y'all or all of y'all, what do you think is causing these trends, this escalation, this arms race, it almost feels like, over the last 20 or 30 years?
I'll start. I think it's a narrow definition of success, right? It's this that somehow going to a certain school will guarantee your life outcome, and that your happiness and your success in life. And I think so many students are approaching this experience as kind of how can I position myself, right? Not in terms of authenticity, but more kind of like, how can I show that I'm excellent? How can I be just extraordinary? And that's a lot of pressure. That's a lot of pressure on anybody, but especially on a 16 or 17-year-old. And so I think the question I kind of come back to is, at what cost, right? Like, at what cost are we kind of building resumes and And I think the pandemic was really informative of this. It made us all step back and say, okay, why are we doing the things we're doing, and what is our goal in doing those? Like, why am I playing year-round sports? Is it because I love it, or is it because it is, I hope it will get me into college, or, you know? And so I think there's a lot of pressure on young people, and we are to blame, right? I mean, in terms of kind of highly selective admission, and I think it's important to step back from that, because you're right, mental health on college campuses is at all-time high in terms of issues and struggles. And many college campuses are doubling their mental health staff. And so how can we get to a good place without, like, driving ourselves into the ground?
Yeah.
But that's how uncertain these trends are. It could be a big athletic win on 1 year for school that drives up, the applications. It could be any number of things, right? So these variations in applications do change the outcomes. That's just math, right? So I think it's important and that's nothing we can necessarily predict or anticipate, nor can the students. I think the sooner we recognize that there is going to be uncertainty and unpredictability in this process, I think it's something to keep in mind as you're going through this process, because there is a chance, just statistically, on any given year at any given school, that someone may not get in. And that's looking perhaps at a very, a great record, a great profile, perhaps looks very similar to a sibling or a relative a year or 2 years prior. And, and I have to say that very often those letters of "we can't accept you" really are not, that you're not, these are great students, and it pains us just as much sometimes to not be able to accept, but that's just a numeric, outcome of it all. But I do worry about students who, again, go and strive for that perfection, that sport that they don't really like, or the activity that they're good at, but again, it's not their passion, because at some point that can't be sustainable. That just can't be sustainable. So the sooner you're able to really then recognize that and come out of it and transition and figure out, I think it's just great experience for students to live through, because eventually there will be that challenge, whether it's in college, when all of a sudden you're in an even more competitive environment because everyone's great, or your first job and you don't get the job you want. It is part of life. There's going to always be an unpredictability, and so I think it's just something we should familiarize ourselves with, and a lot of students aren't necessarily experiencing that, I think, earlier on, because they're doing such great things and doing great and not experiencing, again, those shifts.
I think to this point of stress and some of the anxiety around both sides, the college admission side as well as the college experience itself, some of it is a paradigm shift. Like, I feel like students feel, and it's true, they do not control the full outcome of where they're going to get in or how much money they're going to be given. That is true. But I think a lot of students get stressed because it seems to them that they are out of control versus maybe not controlling a portion. And I just want to kind of walk through it and reframe, maybe for students especially, how I would hope that you would go through this. And that is to say, again, with all your choices and options, you are the one fully in control of where you apply, right? And so let's say that you've done your homework and you've kind of figured out some of the things we've talked about today of what matches and what your goals are and what you're hoping to get out of this. At the end of the day, let's say you apply to 7 or 9 places, okay? You were the one that selected those places. And so first and foremost, and we talk about this and have some colleagues that talk a lot about, eliminating in your mind this idea of a first or top choice and saying, if I eliminated 99.9% of the other places, these are all my top choice or first choice. I've decided I could be happy at these places. They are the kind of place that I'm excited about going. And for parents, when your son or daughter, your child is admitted to a place, like there should be a real celebration around that and an excitement around that. And I know last year my neighbor got into a school and she applied to that school and was not forced to apply to that school. And when she got in, she said, well, it's just the university of, whatever. And I just think that's just tragic in a way because, first of all, so few people get the opportunity to go to college in our world anyway. And now you've been given this opportunity. You should be excited. Now, that's 25%, right, is that you pick where you apply. You will not be in the room where it happens. Don't try to get in that room.
Have people tried to get in the
room? Or
room?
other people try for you.
Yeah, that happens. That happens.
That does happen.
That does happen.
Where,
doesn't work.
Or they end up in jail after. 25%, you're not there, right? You don't decide if you get in or not. You don't decide the financial aid package you receive and the scholarships. You do, again, though, have the opportunity to decide where you go, right? You get into 3 of the 7 or 5 of the 9, and you pick again. And I thought that was it, 66.67%. But I've realized, and the pandemic has helped understand, there's this other piece which puts you at 75% control. And that is wherever you choose to go, you decide how you show up there every day. And I think I really saw this, especially as our students have come back to campus. And really, we've welcomed back 2 classes, really. First years and second years who are really just coming. And we all can say this about, how we show up for our family or how we show up in our neighborhood or how we show up at work and how you show up at school. Like, you are in full control of that. So wherever you ultimately are admitted and decide to go, I think that piece is also huge. It helps to reframe control. And especially coming out of the pandemic or wherever we are in the pandemic, I'm not even sure if we're coming out or halfway through or whatever. But I think all of us would take 75% of control on pretty much anything, right? That's a pretty good deal. And so I would think from a stress standpoint, there's a lot to be said for thinking about it that way.
Yeah, I would just add, I mean, one of the exercises I do with our families is kind of have both students and parents articulate their hopes and fears, just generally and also around this experience, and then share those with each other, right? Because there's a lot of uncertainty out there in the world, right? I mean, beyond college admission, right? There's a lot of uncertainty, financial safety, physical safety, I mean, everything, right? And so we as parents, I have a senior in high school and a sophomore in high school, so I'm living this. We want to control everything we can control. When there's so much uncertainty, if we can just control like our child's future and their success, we want to do that. And right, so like all these other anxieties and everything kind of filter into the college process sometimes, into college admission. And so it is very loaded, right? And so I think the more we can kind of be out to each other about those hopes and fears, it's really healthy. And I'll just add one more thing about the kind of the admission experience and kind of that idea of building resumes and this issue of mental health. When I talk to college admission leaders from all over the country, right? And what I hear again and again and again is they want students of good character and who are joyful, right? That they could fill their classes with students who have straight A's and have done led every club in their school and valedictorians and things like that. They could fill their classes with that, but they want students who are excited about the things they're doing. They're joyful. They're balanced. So all these things. So I think that's another kind of myth that those things aren't valued in admission, and they really are.
And I want to shift gears in a second to the other side of the misconceptions around how y'all evaluate students. But maybe a transition question that follows on the last one is, we all kind of said, yeah, there's these rankings, U.S. News and World Report, and we all kind of pretend like, yeah, this is kind of silly. But it does feel, and especially Eva and Rick, I'm going to, this might be a sensitive question for y'all, that the universities are trying to play a little bit of game there. They're like, well, our yield and our admissions, that affects our rankings. And so we'll do early decision, but then early action. And it's like, I've sat with some of the KLHS students and I'm like, this is like a brain teaser of like, how do we approach this and the probability tree of where this goes. How much is, what do y'all feel about this whole EA, early action, early decision? What are y'all trying to get? And is it part of this broader game that might be driving some of the stress? Eva or Rick,
Yeah, I think the pandemic is also giving us time to pause as well and take a look at our processes and what this is doing. And sure, I think to differing degrees, institutions will, perhaps play to the rankings in different ways. Could be through their admissions, could be in other ways, because there's a whole number of other ways to do that as well. I think for me, and I in this profession, I constantly go back to the why, too, for me, because this is a second profession for me, by the way. And for me, has been always about making sure that students who decide to apply and then be accepted and ultimately enroll at Santa Clara, that there genuinely is a fit and that we can fit into that journey of their aspirations, that we can be a contributing force in that. So these pathways, in my opinion, really give students an opportunity to apply where it makes the most sense for them. So if it's early, that will depend on where they are in that process. If they're certain about it, to what degree there's early decision, early action, and no pressure on our part to apply in any one of them. It's really up to the students and depending on where they are. So that's a process that we certainly encourage students to work with those they know best. College counselors in their high schools are going to know them pretty well, and other folks, but certainly talk to the schools as well and get insights on. We certainly are there to answer questions from parents on what might, given any number of questions, what we might guide or advise or have options on. But we really do try to take a look at that application given and render a decision based on where students are and their certainty, and ultimately that's a very authentic, a very honest application that they're rendering at that time, and really do our part when given that opportunity. We want to reciprocate again what they're asking for us to do in the most earnest way we possibly can at that moment in time.
Yeah, makes sense. Rick?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is, there's no question that a lot of the practices and policies that are in place are not just playing rankings games, but I mean, fundamentally, a lot of schools are going to put that into place because they have bottom lines to meet. I mean, and if they can secure a percentage of their class through early decision, yes, that helps on yield, and maybe that's a tertiary benefit, but also it then helps them to earlier for themselves work the rest of their class and the way they financially package those students, right? And we were talking yesterday about one of the biggest challenges on the college side and on the high school student side is we have, I would call, an unforgiving calendar. And the fact that the number of applications and the number of staff and the time at which you need to turn around decisions and then repackage students and worry about the returning students as well, it wouldn't be the ideal schedule that you would set up, right? But it's necessary. And Brennan referred to this a little bit, and it kind of ties into the conversation around how admission decisions are made. And it also goes back to the conversation around mission. Ultimately, college admission can be defined and understood just through two ways. Those are how decisions are made, no matter which college it is. Number one is supply and demand, right? Supply and demand dictates admit rates. And so you go back in time, again, with the Georgia Tech example, you got a class of 2,200, you've got 9,000 applications, you know what your yield rate is, there's your admit rate. Now we have 50,000 applications. Yes, we've increased the size of our class. We know what our yield rate is. That's going to be dictated. But to the point of how admission decisions are received and felt, it's also important to understand institutional mission. That's the other thing that drives admission decisions. So supply and demand and institutional mission. And so thinking a little bit about this particular area where we are right now, and Georgia Tech as well, we have had schools in this area send us 100 applications. 90 of them want computer science, right? Well, 40% of our class can come from out of state, and we're not filling 40% of our class from California. We're going to spread that around because as a public institution, this is part of the mission and part of the goal. And I think when a student oftentimes gets back these admissions decisions, right, they don't get into Georgia Tech, and they do get into Dartmouth. And they don't understand how that could possibly be the case. Because Dartmouth is, quote, better, or Dartmouth is harder to get into. How is that? You must have made a mistake. Well, institutional mission. Dartmouth is clearly not getting 90 applications from that same high school for the same major, right? And so mission and supply and demand are how admission decisions are made. But on the student side, it feels very different than that. It feels like a judgment. It feels like, some referendum on how well they've done or what their future potential is. And I think it's important to understand kind of some of the business side of how this works.
But I would caution on trying to determine that because every school has is a very different school, has very different supply and demand, has very different programs, has very different flow of applications. And so, I think that this could potentially add to then the pressure and the stress, because if a student, in addition to then just figuring out where I'm going to apply, now I have to decide or determine whether, this angle, it takes away, I think, still what in the end is most important, and it's that fit. I'm going to apply to that school, and I'm going to determine which track I'm going to apply on, because that is the best school for the school I'm interested in for this reason. So still remembering the why is still really important versus trying to dissect how and the stats, because on any given year, it's not going to hold to the next. It's always going to be, and that just adds to, again, the uncertainty of what that outcome. So again, I think it still goes back to the student being really true to submitting an application that is that makes sense for them because they've gone through this process. And I think we on this side of the desk still try to make the best decisions. Certainly for the institution, in the end, we're still looking at these applications holistically, and we recognize that they've put a lot of time, energy, and I agree that sometimes that non-accepted isn't, it's heartbreaking for us. I wish it wasn't called a denial, to be quite honest, because we could very easily accept a good, 70-80% of our students, and they would make great students. We just have some really tough challenges, right, because of these, just mathematical equations sometimes. But again, I just really would caution on students not going too much into those layers, because it just adds to it. And at the end of the day, a student wants to make a decision based on the 5, 10, to however many you want to apply to, because you've determined that they have something there for you. And I agree that you should look at them as all sort of first choices, because even after you get accepted, you don't know how you might change an opinion during that journey. Maybe, financial aid is a determining factor, and you won't know that until you get accepted. So there's a number of things that still could alter your decision-making process. So it is really, I think, healthy for students to look at it from sort of a portfolio standpoint, if you will, but in the end, that there's a real, just really being true to the fit.
Yeah.
Oh, and with an awareness, like you said, Rick, that that higher ed is a business, right? Like we like to think about kind of the altruistic and the mission and the educational value of schools, and that's all there, and it should be kind of front and center, but with an awareness that schools are businesses and need to fill classes, and our early decision and that kind of thing wasn't necessarily designed for students, right? It was designed so that for rankings and for things like that, so that that schools can compete.
Yeah, I think, in fairness to the schools, I think on the other side, we almost don't think about the logistics of tens of thousands of applications and a fixed budget for financial aid. And I know I spun it initially as like, is this just to game the rankings? But there are some logistic benefits to the families too. It's great.
Right.
if some of the students at KLHS, of course we hope that they can get into some of their early action schools, because then they're done. They can relax the rest of the year. Yeah. And it might be good for the schools as well. Shifting gears to how y'all evaluate students. Every admissions director and every college counselor will say, don't pursue things that aren't really you. Don't do the sports that you really don't have a passion for. Follow your real passions. But I'm curious, especially as admissions directors, are y'all able to spot that authenticity? And do y'all try to look at your admitted, and I know every time you go to a new campus, they're like, don't worry, none of you are admissions mistakes. Mm-hmm. But do you sometimes say, well, maybe that person was an admissions mistake? We should have caught that in the essay. Do you go reading like, oh yeah, it was there. Eva, I'll start with you. Like, can you spot that really, or sometimes?
I think we really value, again, the holistic application review process, because I think in the end of the day, we're not just looking at numbers and check boxes across activities. For us, an application really leaves us with a feeling, right? And that feeling comes through when there's like corroboration across the application, where transcripts, or even maybe sometimes a dip in a transcript sort of is explained in a certain way, whether it be a student or letter of recommendation. But in the end, you get this feeling of a student portrait, right? There's a feeling you leave after you review that application. It's not just items. Sometimes I worry about some of these. I think, well, when does the student sleep? There's just all these number of activities, but in the end, again, it's okay. Well, what is that passion? I think that we all, in the same way that we read a good novel and or an article, and you leave with like, that's the meaning behind this story, or that's the lesson, or and I think when we read an application, we leave with, again, a sort of a feeling of what the student's all about. And sometimes when there's just a number of different activities, not always true. I don't think that necessarily means that the student won't make a good student, but we want to leave really getting to know them and what their why is. That's why we refer back to this why. It is really important. I think if students go through this journey asking that question along the way, very likely you'll render an application where it's just very clear in front and center.
Rick? False positives, false negatives?
Oh, I was really geared toward the latter part of yours. This is just like an internal joke among our staff, but whenever like a student gets in trouble, we'll send it to the person who ran the committee. For that,
you don't really do that?
Oh yeah, we do. That.
Okay, that's good. I mean, you need a feedback loop.
Yeah, it's kind of more just tongue in cheek a little bit, like you guys missed that one. No, I mean, I think that I get it. How a lot of admission people love to say, "Oh yeah, I can spot when someone else wrote that essay," or when. I don't think that's always true. I mean, I guess what I would just say to students is, we don't expect perfection. We do appreciate and see in grades how they sometimes fluctuate, but to your point from earlier, like a kid rebounds, like there's a lot of value in seeing, kind of how that plays out. And again, and hopefully this takes some pressure off of students. This has become something you will hear people say, but only because it's kind of sometimes it's trite because it's true. But there is a misconception we're expecting you to have done everything, right? To have played sports and worked and been involved in the school, and I think students really feel that. And the pandemic helped to humanize college admission because we couldn't travel, we couldn't, have people to our campuses, and so we're doing Zoom calls with students, and like kids and cats and all kinds of chaos is happening behind us. And I think that was really beneficial because it's a reminder that these are just people, and so we are living through this. I'm homeschooling, virtual schooling my kids. While I'm talking to students who are going through the same experience. And, I guess what I would just say is we understand and know that, my 13-year-old son who plays soccer, more and more of his time is demanded by that soccer coach, right? They are wanting them to watch film. They're wanting them to travel. They're wanting them to play all seasons. And we do know that we're living in a more specialized culture, for better or worse. The idea of being able to do it all is just not reasonable or practical, right? So this idea of what we would call well-rounded classes versus all well-rounded students is a real thing. And it's interesting because here at Santa Clara, as an example, you've got some kid who worked 30 hours a week because their family needed them to, living in a residence hall with some other student who's never worked a day in their life but played 3 sports. Well, they're up at 3 a.m. eating pizza, and that's an interesting conversation. And in the way that plays out in the lecture halls, the way that plays out in their labs, the way that plays out on the intramural Frisbee field makes for a healthy, dynamic campus, right? A place where people are stretched and challenged. That's what college should be. And that's what we're trying to create and look for in applications. So I hope that takes some pressure off of feeling what we're not really looking for.
Brennan, I'll put it on you. As with decades of college counseling experience, have you seen kids who've been able to, quote, fake their authenticity or not, or it never really works?
No, it never really works. I think Rick is kind of playing it down, but I think college admission officers are pretty good at seeing through things. And again, I'll come back to that kind of idea of triangulation. Like, there's lots of different aspects that schools that are reading holistically are looking at. They're looking at letters of recommendation. They're looking at essays, and they can tell when an essay is written by a parent. I mean, you can tell when an essay is written by a 50-year-old and when it's written by a 17-year-old.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I mean, and so they can tell that kind of thing. They're also getting, the courses you took and how you've challenged yourself, and they're getting all these things. And if they can see the lack of cohesion in an application. I used to be in admission, and I could see it. You could see when a student there was something just off. The story wasn't well researched, or it wasn't well written, right? And so I haven't seen any student that can really pull it over on an admission officer, and maybe that's just because when they've tried, I've kind of pushed that back down and said, no, that's not going to fly. I think that's the whole thing about this Varsity Blues scandal is, right? Like, it was an extreme version of some of the little stuff that happens. I think that students and parents start to kind of fudge an application a little, and then, kind of it's a slippery slope. But I think it's very apparent on admission side.
And I could imagine like the good guidance counselors being a nice delimiter or boundary, because their credibility matters a lot with the admissions officers, and if it's kind of a fake application or less than authentic,
right,
that credibility gets shot.
Selling used goods.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, and I know we're how late can we go? Because this is maybe
5 after.
5. Okay. Well, I want to make some time for questions too, but I have so many myself. I will go to another hot topic that people ask me a lot about, and that's around standardized tests.
Oh, you're here for the next 3 hours.
Yes.
Sorry, folks. If you need to leave, you can get up and go. Sorry.
And I have a view. Khan Academy, we're the official practice for the SAT. We have a partnership with College Board. When people ask me about standardized tests, I'm like, what do you not like, the standardized or the test? And they're like, oh, yeah, you're right. But in all seriousness, I do have a view there of how people might over or under index. And there's a huge variation now where certain places have gone testing optional, like Santa Clara University. We're out here in California, where the Cal system has forbidden standardized tests effectively, or at least the current ones. And then you have Georgia Tech, where it's a mandatory standardized test. So I'm curious about how y'all think about that. When you go testing optional, what's the alternative? What do you gain? What do you lose? When you're not testing optional, what do you gain? What do you lose? And how do y'all think about the test generally? Eva?
Yeah. Well, prior to the pandemic, we did require tests. And so, it seemed to always, correlate and demonstrate that there was a direct correlation to persistence from first year to second year. Well, the pandemic gives you, there's just a lot of challenges. Students weren't able to take tests, and we went test optionals. Some students submitted them, some did not. And so what we decided to do was to take first a 2-year approach. Now we've added a 3rd year to just leave it test optional, give students a choice, and then we'll take a look to see if there was any variation in that transition. Depending, this first year I think is going to be, it's just such a off, weird kind of a year that in and of itself, it may not give us the information we need. So again, we need to have more longitudinal approach to that analysis. So we'll see where we conclude that, but ultimately, we will then make a decision. That said, there is just a lot of controversy around the standardized tests. And we know it's changed over time. The SAT is not the SAT that was there 20, 30 years ago. We also know that there's more possibilities to prepare for it, and some students have that opportunity and some students do not. And there's studies that also show that there's, that it's a lot more of a barrier for students of low income or first-gen families, and that could all be true. And so we want to see, right? We want to see like what do we learn? But if we see that it also creates some benefits in opening up channels and eliminating some of those barriers, because in the end, if we're still accomplishing as an institution a dynamic population, right, of students who are going to be thriving and learning and having great outcomes, well then is there a purpose for the SAT? Mm-hmm. I think we still need to ask ourselves that question, right? Like what is it really, what are we really learning from it? And I'm not so sure we have that answer, but we want to know. And I think that's why a lot of institutions, especially in California, you have the big UCs. It's the most populous state of the country. The population is very diverse, not just racially, it's economically diverse. And so if we're there as institutions to create a level of social mobility, well, we now have to figure out a way to, again, create a process that's going to be open and accessible to all. And so I think the data will allow us to do that.
How are y'all thinking about it right now? Is testing optional? I completely agree with everything you just said. My spiel is that, well, it's part of a broader picture, et cetera, et cetera. But in a testing optional world where all things equal, I know it's never truly all things else equal, but there's a student who has what you would traditionally consider to be a good SAT score for your community. It tends to correlate with academic success on your community, and then there's a student who doesn't have it. How do y'all de-risk the other student in a testing optional world?
Well, I think what's true, what was always true, has always been true for us, is that there's actually more to learn from a student's transcript, from a 4-year period versus a one-time sitting. And so, we spend quite a bit of time doing the forensics, if you will, on the high school transcripts from 9-year to senior year. And we see, just as other parts of the application give you other information on a student, that's true about the SAT test, is just another piece of information that could potentially enhance, but that isn't the deal maker.
Yeah, that makes sense. Rick?
Yeah, testing is like such a good illustration of how, even though everything we send kids looks the same, when you cover up the name of a school, it does all sort of blur together. Kids outside with professors under trees, and football teams winning games, and it's the same. But they are different. They're different from one school to the next. And so you need to look at the inputs and the outputs and what is correlative to success. At the end of the day, that's how we're judged. Are the students that we're bringing in doing well academically? Are they getting engaged and involved on your campus community? But
so you do get feedback from the faculty of like, hey, I don't know who you're sending us, but they're
just a little.
You do, okay.
Oh, just
solicited and unsolicited, right?
Right.
But they don't necessarily attribute it to the test scores.
No, not to that.
Yeah.
But I didn't realize that. So there's that feedback. Okay.
Yeah.
But we get plenty of feedback about this.
Okay.
We hear from all constituencies.
Wow. Okay.
And outside of it. So, I think it's incumbent upon the folks that are sitting in those seats to determine what is predictive of success academically for the students that we're bringing in. At Georgia Tech in particular, 97% of the students who come to us have taken calculus or beyond. Mm-hmm. And so in a lot of ways, they're going backwards to take the test, right? To Eva's point, that we've seen for years that looking at progression in high school, performance in high school, and then you think, and adults in the room will know who have gone to college, like all of that plus juggling lots of things outside the classroom, time management and engagement, That's what makes a good high school or college student. Well, high school student for sure, and definitely college student as well. So, again, this points to how higher ed is diverse. In Georgia, there are 26 public institutions. We are one of those. But we are part of a system, a public system, that decided that all schools needed to go back to requiring tests. Now, for our particular population, we have plenty of data that shows that's really not what's predictive, but we're part of a system, and therefore, to the point of constituents, we adhere to their direction, right? But we have 25% of students who came in this last year who look identical to those who did not have testing. So 25% came in without tests, 75% came in. If you look at them in GPA, course progression, involvement outside the classroom, all of our rubrics for other evaluation within holistic review, they're the same. Our hope is that once we have first year retention information, GPA, et cetera, we'll be able to remake a case for whether or not testing is or needs to be part of the future, right? But again, as part of a system, we'll see what leverage we really have.
But how did your applicant pool look differently? How did it look different when you didn't have tests?
Oh, in terms of the demographics of the students? Well, in our own state, we saw a huge increase in the number of applications. And I do think that that was certainly part of it. It was a more diverse class that applied for sure. And, when we talk about barriers and talk about accessibility, there's no doubt that the test ranges, which can be intimidating and daunting, were keeping students from applying. So taking that down, that pressure off, opened up the willingness, I think, of a lot of students to apply who did come from various backgrounds. So again, that was positive for us, no question. So, I think that the dilemma that a lot of students are going to have going forward, which we haven't talked about, is should I send my test score or not? If I've got a test, should I send it or not? And I'd be curious, of course, to hear your perspective here. But, what I've been telling students is if a school is test optional, you are going to need to make a decision around whether you want tests to be part of that evaluation or not. Is it representative of who you are in addition to what else you've sent? Schools do publish middle 50% ranges of previously admitted classes. I would say that if you're kind of scoring in 50% or higher, it's likely worth going ahead and just send that. But you need to just think of it as I can either put, if this is a stool and there's a couple legs there of transcripts, recommendation letters, essays, and all this other, do I want to put weight on the testing peg of the stool, or do I want to let the rest of the legs hold that weight without it?
And how much time do you spend preparing for tests, right? So it's kind of this cost benefit, do you, depending on where you're testing, if you first test or do the PSAT, is it going to help? What is your goal? Like, what schools are you looking at? And is it going to be more worth your while to spend lots of hours doing test prep to do well on this one test? Or do you fill that time with something else that is really more meaningful to you potentially, or might make you stand out in different ways to colleges in terms of maybe an internship or things like that? And so, it's kind of balancing those things and saying, okay, what am I willing to do? And what's it worth to me, right? Mm-hmm. And making that decision.
Yeah. I'll throw out a shameless plug for another project related to KLS and Khan Academy called Schoolhouse.world, which is about students tutoring other students. And we did it first out of the pandemic, just a way to get free tutoring out in the world over Zoom. But then we started to see universities, University of Chicago and MIT have, and we're going to try to convince a few more. What I've told them is, look, if I can show you a student who has tutored algebra or statistics or calculus, not only do they know the material, they can communicate, they can empathize. It's almost like a standardized community service. Why wouldn't that student be interesting? So I do think there's also going to be new ways of signaling in a kind of new form of standard, like a new standardized way, which I don't think is a replacement for things like the ACT or SAT, but could be another dimension. And there'll be more. Kids can get really creative about it. Do we have a mic? I want to make sure I said I would make the audience questions, but I capitalized all of the time, which I could do for another hour. But are there any quick questions we could go from the audience? Yes, right here. And I'll repeat it. I don't know if we have a microphone.
Hi, my name is Aditi. I'm actually a sophomore business student here at Santa Clara University. And I wanted to attend this talk because I think unpack the college barrier and reflecting on that piece is very important to me. And a question that I have for you guys is, what is one single phrase or piece of advice you would give to students who are currently in the high school space, transitioning into college students or into adults, and any advice on this?
So I'll repeat it. Aditi, who's a business major, and we got a microphone now. Sorry, we missed you, Aditi. And her one quick question is, one piece of advice for anyone making this transition, either into college or actually even beyond college. And that's actually maybe a good way to finish up.
Yeah, mine would be ask for help early and often. And don't look at asking for help as a weakness, but rather as a strength. And I think that as people, whether that be in jobs, whether that be in high school or college or any other transition, people legitimately want to help you. And when you transition from high school to college, there's going to be a less hand-holding. You're going to need to be more proactive, and that is good training for the rest of your life. But it was said earlier, and I'm trying to remember who said it, but this idea of what has defined me and who am I. A lot of students coming to college, they're the ones that were tutoring. They're the ones who A's came quickly and easily. And all of a sudden, maybe you're surrounded by other people where now what's my identity? If these people are also that person, and I've never had to seek help or ask for help. And I would just say, and this goes back to some of the mental health side of things, everybody, no matter what they're posting on social media, no matter what their life looks like now, they have needed help. And we all need help. We all question ourselves. We all feel like we don't belong at times. And the earlier students can seek that out, because it is there. I mean, colleges pour tons of resources into this. And it's just incumbent upon the student to seek that out and be proactive. So I would say, no matter what stage you're in, whatever, wherever you are, ask and seek help. And that is a strength, not a weakness.
And I would just build on that and just say, beyond help, seek connection, right? From day one in college or in work or in whatever it might be, find those ways to connect with other people. So I always say to students, join things as soon as you get to college. You can always kind of cut back, but it's harder to get involved once time has passed. So get involved in a bunch of things, really throw yourselves into the experience, and also realize that life and education is not linear, right? It weaves and there's so many different pathways, and if you can approach this as kind of with this healthy perspective of there's not one perfect place for me. There's going to be things about Georgia Tech or Santa Clara or that I don't like, right? And that's okay. And there's going to be things about other schools that I don't like. And even though it looks like other people are super happy, that there's not one set way, and that if you can remain open and not so fixed, if you kind of have that growth mindset, then it's going to work out.
Yeah.
Thanks for that question. I think that especially in this last year, we've all craved connection. Right? We've all craved, other people, being in company with other people, and even those of us who perhaps are extroverts have still had to transition back to that as we've found, going back to work or going back to school. And so I would encourage folks to find community, right? And I think a good way to find that, and I think maybe it's because I'm at a Jesuit university, but I know it's true. It's been true for me even prior, is that I find a lot of satisfaction and feeling also just a sense of purpose, which I think is a real motivator, is when I do something for someone else. And so, yes, we might need help ourselves. Absolutely, search for that help, find connection, but also try to give a little. Because whether it be in tutoring or just, maybe you identify someone who is struggling, is giving back. is that idea of giving back is always feels really good. And that's another way to just also form connection, making new friendships. But it's finding ways of just reconnecting to people in ways that are meaningful and that just fuel your energy to be here, to energize others, to find strength in community. Yeah.
Well, that's wonderful. Oh, thank you all. We could literally talk for another 2 hours, and I know most of y'all have other things to do, although I'm happy to stay. But huge takeaways from this conversation. What I heard from y'all is there's no perfect college. It's really about finding a place that doesn't just confirm your identity, but can grow your identity, that can challenge your identity. I heard authenticity and it's not just about getting into college. It's just you're going to be happier. Get help and give help. Two big themes, and those and to kind of reach out and form connection. And I think those sound all the ingredients for it. There's no perfect decision or no right decision, but you can make the decision right by doing all of the above. So thank you all so much, and thank you everyone here for this great conversation.